To the Finance Minister Mathias Cormann in Perth, Western Australia. Mathias Cormann, thank you for joining us. First story of the day has been the lead story all week. Gladys Liu. Is the Prime Minister playing the race card by saying we can't criticise her because of her Chinese heritage?
Well, the Prime Minister is defending a good member of Parliament who is being absolutely unfairly attacked by the Labor Party. And I mean, let's not beat around the bush. I mean, the Labor Party is running this dog whistle that Gladys Liu, because she was born in China and was involved in Chinese community organisations that her Labor opponent was involved in as well, incidentally, that somehow that makes her a spy. I mean, that is the smear, that is the dog whistle that the Labor Party is running. They wouldn't be doing it if it was anybody else other than a Chinese-born Member of Parliament who is involved in a Chinese community or who has been involved in a whole series of Chinese community organisations here in Australia.
The issue isn't that she is Chinese-born, it's her associations with groups linked to the Chinese government, including today we've learned a $40,000 donation that wasn't properly declared, associations she can't remember being a part of, and inconsistencies with her statements.
Well, I mean, the Chinese community organisations that she was involved in and is being criticised for, her Labor opponent was involved with as well. And I just heard Anthony Albanese say, oh, well, that shouldn't matter because her opponent was Taiwanese. Well, that's not the point. We are not actually criticising the Labor candidate for having been part of these organisations either. Just because you're a member of an organisation doesn't mean that you're necessarily aware or involved in anything else that might be going on without your knowledge. I mean, this is a complete and utter beat up. The truth of the matter is that the reason we're having this conversation the way we have is because the Labor Party still cannot accept the verdict of the Australian people at the last election. They can't accept that they lost an election that they thought they had already won. And certainly, and in particular in the seat of Chisholm, they were absolutely convinced that Chisholm was one of the first seats that would be in their bag of seats at the election. And do you think that if the Labor candidate had been elected, having been a member of the same organisations, having been appointed as honorary chairman of one of those organisations and having declared that she wasn't aware that she had been, do you think the Labor Party would be asking these sorts of questions now and running these sorts of smears now?
Why won't Gladys Liu put her statement on the record in Parliament in a way that would make her liable if there is a misrepresentation in it?
Well, her statement, as I understand it, her statement was tabled in Parliament. I mean, her statement was made publicly. She stands by her statement. I mean, I don't quite understand the point here. I mean, she's clearly made a public statement, put her name to it, explained, obviously, her view and assessment of the situation that needed to be clarified, and she stands by that statement.
Now, if we turn to the economy, I know that that's something Labor was still pushing this week. We've heard the line from them a few times that the Reserve Bank governor's called for financial stimulus 7 times. Isn't that correct? He has called for that, hasn't he?
Well, we are providing significant financial stimulus. I mean, we've legislated for more than $300 billion worth of income tax relief. We've boosted our infrastructure investment pipeline from $75 billion to $100 billion over the next decade at our last budget. And I mean, I would point to repeated statements from the governor of the Reserve Bank, a week or so ago, and over the last 2 or 3 months, repeated statements where he made very clear that his expectation was that economic growth would gradually strengthen moving forward on the back of lower interest rates, our income tax cuts, continued high investment in infrastructure, the stabilisation of the property market, in particular in New South Wales and Victoria, and indeed our comparatively lower currency at present. So, I mean, all of the stabilisers are working, monetary policy and fiscal policy are heading in the same direction, and we are continuing to pursue a pro-growth agenda, which was framed in the context of our budget, in the context of the global economic headwinds that we knew were coming our way. So the fundamental point here is monetary policy and fiscal policy are heading in the same direction, seeking to build a stronger, more resilient economy into the future in the context of undoubted global economic headwinds continuing to come our way.
Realistically, the Reserve Bank governor said he's only got 2 more interest rate cuts up his sleeve before he's not really going to be able to have any impact on the economy with an interest rate cut. Surely that's a very concerning sign for the government.
Well, obviously, we continue to assess all of the economic information, all of the economic data, and once a year there's a budget, and then 6 months later there's a half-yearly budget update. The next budget update is due in the middle of December, thereabouts, after the third quarter national accounts data has been released. And we will continue to make judgments in the context of obviously the economic data and what is in the best interest of keeping the Australian economy strong moving forward. But the point is, our budget delivered on the 2nd of April was framed in the context of the global economic headwinds we knew were there and were coming, in the context of the downside risks in the domestic economy that were there and that we had to deal with. And so we very much have a pro-growth budget, a plan to build a stronger, more resilient economy into the future, to deal with all of the challenges in front of us.
Will we see a surplus in that mid-year budget forecast?
Well, 2019-20, of course, is the year when the budget returns to surplus, and that's obviously, we will continue to work to maintain that surplus and to maintain the budget in surplus over the forward estimates and indeed over the medium term.
And Jackie Lambie, Tasmanian Senator, has written a very scathing op-ed about John Setka refusing to stand down. She says that she's giving you guys more ammunition to be able to attack the union movement. What did you make of her thoughts?
Well, obviously I'm not going to speak on behalf of Jackie, and I'm not going to provide a running commentary on the comments of a colleague. But what I would say is that the government doesn't attack the union movement. The government is focused on making sure that all of the various organisations, whether they're employee or employer organisations, comply with the law, and that where there is consistent and persistent breaking of the law, that the system is improved and that the opportunities to impose the rule of law are strengthened. And that's why we have got pieces of legislation in front of the Parliament, like the Ensuring Integrity Bill, which targets not just unions. It focuses on both unions and employer organisations to ensure that we can maintain the rule of law, because that is very important for our economic prosperity into the future.
But the government has used John Setka as an example of why the Ensuring Integrity Bill needs to go through.
Well, obviously there is a pattern of constant law breaking in sections of the union movement, and we want to ensure that the tools are available to deal with that more effectively, because clearly the legal framework as it has been in place so far hasn't been able to deal with this constant pattern of law breaking, and that is bad for the economy, and that is bad for jobs, that is bad for wages growth, and so that is that is one of the things that we want to address, and that is why we're pursuing pieces of legislation like that.
One of the other pieces of legislation that has been going through this week was about the vegan activists going onto farms. Senator Rex Patrick was saying that he was concerned that there weren't sufficient protections for journalists. Can you ensure that there won't be any journalists prosecuted under this legislation?
Well, obviously journalists are not the targets of this legislation, and this is a bill that was debated quite thoroughly in the Senate this week, and some amendments were passed in cooperation with non-government senators through the Senate. So, we believe that we've got the balance right. We believe that, this is about protecting farmers from, obviously completely unreasonable, extreme activities that they have been exposed to, in particular in recent times.
So there are sufficient protections for journalists in that legislation as it's drafted?
Well, firstly, the answer is yes. I don't believe that that journalists have got anything to worry about in relation to this legislation. And journalists obviously are not the target here. I think everybody understands who the target is of this legislation. And as I've said, it's gone through a thorough process in the Senate, and we believe that at the end of that process that we've got the balance right.